Scott Bessent, who served as Treasury Secretary under President Donald Trump, has suggested a universal tariff on all U.S. imports. His proposal starts with a 2.5% tax on imports, increasing by the same percentage every month. Over time, this could reach up to 20%. The idea behind this gradual increase is to give businesses and other countries enough time to adjust and negotiate better trade deals. However, President Trump wants even higher tariffs. He has already proposed new tariffs on computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. Trump argues that these tariffs will reduce imports, strengthen U.S. manufacturing, and counteract subsidies that give foreign companies an unfair advantage. These tariffs would likely be much higher than 2.5%. Since taking office on January 20, 2025, President Trump has wasted no time in enforcing a range of tariffs aimed at key U.S. trading partners, especially Canada, Mexico, and China. His administration sees these tariffs as a way to deal with issues like illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and trade imbalances. One of his first major moves was a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico, which he announced on his inauguration day. In a speech on January 30th, Trump confirmed that this tariff will officially take effect on Saturday. He is also considering whether to apply tariffs to oil imports from these countries, stating that he will evaluate whether the prices they charge are fair. This decision is part of his effort to tackle illegal immigration and the smuggling of fentanyl-related chemicals. Canada has strongly opposed these tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has warned that Canada will introduce its own retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods if the U.S. moves forward with its plans. The goal is to spread the impact fairly across all Canadian regions, ensuring that no single province is unfairly affected. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford has suggested cutting electricity exports to U.S. states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota as a response. Canada plays a major role in supplying power to these areas, and this move could put pressure on the U.S. According to a survey by KPMG, 81% of Canadian business leaders are willing to face short-term economic difficulties caused by tariffs in order to secure a fair trade deal that protects Canada's economy and sovereignty. President Trump has downplayed Canada's importance to the U.S. economy. He recently stated, "We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody." In a press conference 2 weeks ago, he claimed that Canada benefits from U.S. subsidies worth about $200 billion a year and has a weak military that relies on U.S. protection. He even suggested that Canada should become the 51st U.S. state as a way to eliminate trade deficits and avoid tariffs. In response, Prime Minister Trudeau has stated that nothing is off the table when it comes to Canada's retaliation. This suggests that Canada may take more drastic steps, such as restricting energy exports, though there is some internal debate over this approach. Aside from counter tariffs, Canada is actively working with other countries, including the European Union, Denmark, Mexico, and Britain, to develop a coordinated response to the U.S. tariffs. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has reached out to her international counterparts to discuss joint strategies. Speaking in Ottawa, she confirmed that she has been in contact with Mexico and plans to speak with officials from Britain and the European Union this week. "My main focus in these discussions will be on how we can respond to the tariffs together. We know that in many European capitals, as well as in the UK, conversations are already happening about possible countermeasures." She also emphasized the importance of strengthening trade between Canada and the EU to reduce reliance on the US-Canada, and the EU signed a free trade agreement in 2016, and Joly believes now is the time to make it stronger. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has also spoken out against the tariffs, saying that they will not solve immigration and drug-related issues. Instead, she believes the U.S. and Mexico should work together to tackle these problems. She also warned that the tariffs could damage diplomatic relations between the two countries. Beyond targeting Canada and Mexico, Trump is also cracking down on China. He has proposed a 10% additional tariff on all imports from China, citing China's role in producing and distributing fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid that has worsened the U.S. drug crisis. The U.S. drug crisis has been a key justification for President Trump's aggressive tariff policies. His administration has announced a 10% tariff on all imports from China, set to take effect on February 1, 2025. The stated reason behind this measure is China's involvement in the production and distribution of fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid contributing to the U.S. drug crisis. In response, the Chinese government has emphasized the mutual benefits of trade between the two nations and expressed a willingness for constructive talks to resolve ongoing trade disputes. As part of his broader trade strategy, President Trump has also warned the European Union, EU, that it could face tariffs if it does not increase its purchases of American oil and gas. He insists that the EU needs to reduce its trade deficit with the US by significantly boosting energy imports. If it fails to do so, the Trump administration has threatened to impose tariffs on European goods. However, Trump's ambitions go beyond tariffs. He has renewed his interest in purchasing Greenland and has even not ruled out military action to achieve this goal. In response to Trump's renewed push to acquire Greenland, Denmark has taken several steps to reinforce its sovereignty over the territory and strengthen alliances within Europe. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been actively engaging with European leaders to mobilize support against U.S. pressure. She has emphasized the importance of European unity in facing external threats, stating that we must stand together in Europe. In recent discussions with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron, Frederiksen focused on enhancing European cooperation and security. Chancellor Scholz reaffirmed his commitment to defending existing borders, indirectly referencing U.S. ambitions regarding Greenland. To strengthen its military presence in Greenland, Denmark has announced a major investment of approximately $2.1 billion. This funding will be used to build 3 new Arctic naval vessels, acquire surveillance drones, and improve satellite monitoring systems. These initiatives are designed to bolster Denmark's defense capabilities in the Arctic region and send a clear signal that Greenland is not for sale. Furthermore, Denmark is working to unite its European allies to safeguard its control over Greenland. Frederiksen is holding talks with key European leaders and is expected to solidify a unified stance at an upcoming security summit in Brussels. Among the topics to be discussed is the potential deployment of European troops in Greenland, although Denmark has yet to make a formal request. Greenland itself has responded firmly to Trump's renewed interest in acquiring the territory. Greenland's Prime Minister Mute B. Egede has stated that while the island remains open to deeper cooperation with the U.S., its people do not wish to become Americans. He reiterated Greenland's strong desire for self-determination and eventual independence, making it clear that the territory belongs to its own people. As one of the U.S.'s major trading partners, the EU is already facing escalating tensions with Washington. A series of energy crises, caused by Ukraine halting Russian energy transit, Qatar stopping gas exports to Europe, and unexplained technical issues leading to supply disruptions, have left the EU in an increasingly unstable position. These challenges have been further worsened by new U.S. sanctions on Russian oil and gas, leading to a surge in global energy prices. The EU has been hit the hardest by these developments, as gas prices soar, inflation rises, and public dissatisfaction with the European Commission grows. Amid these economic pressures, Trump has announced plans for additional tariffs on European products, further straining the already fragile relationship between the U.S. and the EU. These tariffs are expected to have long-term economic consequences for Europe, exacerbating existing financial struggles and threatening the region's economic stability. In response, the EU is taking decisive steps to minimize the potential fallout. Recognizing the need to reduce its reliance on U.S. trade, the EU has accelerated efforts to diversify its global trade partnerships. A key part of this strategy is the recently signed free trade agreement with Mexico, a U.S. neighbor. This deal strengthens the EU's economic position in North America while also sending a clear message that Europe is capable of forging significant trade partnerships outside of U.S. influence. In addition to this, the EU has secured a landmark free trade agreement with South American countries, reinforcing its commitment to expanding its global trade network ahead of Trump's potential tariffs. These strategic partnerships serve multiple purposes. They help protect Europe from possible U.S. economic pressure while also asserting the EU's role as a major player in global trade. More than just economic agreements, these deals are geopolitical statements demonstrating the EU's determination to counter the challenges posed by a second Trump presidency. In this analysis, we examine the EU's countermeasures and their potential impact on the U.S.-EU relationship. The European Union and Mexico have recently finalized a modernized trade agreement, significantly enhancing their economic partnership and positioning the EU as a more resilient force in international trade. The European Union, EU, and Mexico signed a modernized trade agreement on January 17, 2025, aiming to reduce both regions' economic dependence on the United States, especially in anticipation of potential U.S. tariff increases under President Donald Trump. The agreement builds on previous trade frameworks and seeks to strengthen economic ties between the EU and Mexico, offering mutual benefits to both economies. One of the key aspects of the EU-Mexico trade agreement is the elimination of high tariffs on various EU exports to Mexico, including agricultural products such as cheese, poultry, pork, pasta, apples, jams, chocolate, and wine. This is expected to significantly boost EU agri-food exports to Mexico. Additionally, EU businesses will gain better access to Mexican government contracts, investment opportunities, and service sectors, including financial services and telecommunications. This ensures that European companies receive the same fair treatment as Mexico's other key trade partners, such as the US and South Korea. The agreement also includes strong commitments to labor rights and environmental protections, reflecting the shared dedication of both parties to sustainable development. Another important aspect of the deal is its focus on securing the supply chain of essential raw materials, ensuring a stable and sustainable supply for key industries. This modernized agreement updates the original EU-Mexico Global Agreement, which had been in place since 2000. The new deal is designed to reflect the evolving economic landscape and deepen the strategic partnership between the two regions. However, before it can take effect, it must be ratified by both EU and Mexican legislators. The ratification process is expected to face scrutiny, particularly from European farmers concerned about increased competition from Mexican agricultural products. Meanwhile, the EU has also finalized a historic trade agreement with the Mercosur bloc, consisting of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. This landmark deal, reached after 25 years of negotiations, aims to create one of the world's largest free trade zones covering over 700 million people and nearly 25% of global GDP. Key elements of the EU-Mercosur trade agreement include major tariff reductions, with plans to remove tariffs on over 90% of goods traded between the EU and Mercosur countries. This could potentially save EU companies an estimated €4 billion annually in export duties. The agreement also improves market access for EU industries, such as automobiles and chemicals, while allowing South American agricultural products like beef and poultry greater access to the EU market, albeit within specific quotas to protect European farmers. Both parties have committed to upholding the Paris Climate Agreement and taking measures to prevent deforestation by 2030. The agreement also includes a dispute resolution mechanism to ensure that environmental and sustainability commitments are enforced. However, the deal has sparked significant opposition within the EU, particularly from farmers and environmental groups. Critics argue that an influx of South American agricultural goods could harm European farmers and undermine environmental standards. French President Emmanuel Macron has been one of the most vocal opponents, insisting on stronger safeguards and additional sustainability commitments before full implementation. For the EU-Mercosur agreement to take effect, it must be ratified by all 27 EU member states and approved by the European Parliament. Given the existing resistance, particularly from countries with strong agricultural sectors, the ratification process is expected to face hurdles and could take several years before full implementation. The evolving economic strategies of the EU have deep historical roots. Following World War II, the United States played a crucial role in shaping modern Europe, laying the foundation for the EU's formation and economic development. One of the most significant initiatives was the Marshall Plan, launched in 1948, which provided financial aid to war-torn European nations to help them rebuild their economies and encourage regional cooperation. The U.S. also played a key role in supporting the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, in 1951, seeing it as a way to prevent future conflicts between France and Germany by integrating their key industries. By 1954, the EU's predecessor had established a delegation in Washington, D.C. to manage growing economic and political ties. This relationship deepened further in 1961, when the U.S. set up the United States mission to the European communities in Brussels, signaling a long-term commitment to fostering political and economic cooperation. Beyond economic cooperation, the United States also played a key role in shaping Europe's security alliances. Immediately after World War II, the U.S. emerged as a global leader, actively shaping the post-war international order. Recognizing the growing threat posed by the Soviet Union, the U.S. took decisive steps to counter Soviet expansion and promote democratic values. One of the most significant moves was the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a military alliance designed to defend Western democracies and counter Soviet influence in Europe. In 1949, as the Soviet Union's influence grew in Eastern Europe and actions such as the Berlin blockade intensified geopolitical tensions, the United States led the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This collective defense pact brought together the US, Canada, and several Western European nations, committing each member to defend one another in the event of an attack. The US played a crucial role in NATO, not just as a financial backer but also by stationing troops in Europe and appointing General Dwight D. Eisenhower as NATO's first Supreme Commander. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine, which marked a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. The doctrine declared that the United States would support any nation resisting subjugation by armed minorities or external pressures, directly targeting the spread of communism. The first beneficiaries of this policy were Greece and Turkey, which received significant economic and military aid to prevent them from falling under Soviet influence. This strategy laid the foundation for the U.S. containment policy throughout the Cold War, aiming to curb the spread of Soviet-backed regimes worldwide. To complement this effort, the U.S. launched the Marshall Plan in 1948, a large-scale economic aid program designed to rebuild war-torn Europe. By revitalizing European economies, the plan sought to create stable conditions for democratic institutions and reduce the appeal of communist ideologies. The success of the Marshall Plan further strengthened Western Europe's alignment with U.S. policies, reinforcing the strategic partnership between the United States and its allies during the early years of the Cold War. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, further cemented military cooperation between the United States and its European allies within NATO. The conflict heightened fears of communist expansion, leading NATO to establish the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in 1951. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed as Supreme Allied Commander, marking NATO's transition from a political alliance to a comprehensive military organization. However, divisions within the alliance became apparent during the Suez Crisis of 1956. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain, France, and Israel launched a military intervention to regain control. The U.S., under President Eisenhower, opposed the invasion, fearing that it would destabilize the region and push Arab nations closer to the Soviet Union. In response, the U.S. applied diplomatic and economic pressure on its European allies, forcing them to withdraw their forces, signaling growing European efforts toward independent foreign policy. The Berlin Crisis of 1961 was a defining moment in the Cold War, significantly affecting U.S.-European relations. In June 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev met with U.S. President John F. Kennedy, demanding the withdrawal of Allied forces from West Berlin and threatening to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany that would revoke American, British, and French access to West Berlin. In response, President Kennedy reaffirmed U.S. support for West Berlin, ordering an increase in troop deployments and doubling draft calls to demonstrate military readiness. This crisis underscored the importance of NATO as a stabilizing force in Europe, reinforcing Western unity against Soviet aggression. Throughout the confrontation, the U.S. also continued to support European integration, viewing a unified and economically strong Europe as a key defense against communist expansion. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, became a major point of contention between the United States and its European allies. While the U.S. escalated military involvement in Southeast Asia, many European nations remained reluctant to support the war. France, in particular, strongly opposed U.S. intervention, largely due to its own colonial history in Indochina and its desire to maintain an independent foreign policy. Meanwhile, countries like the United Kingdom and West Germany expressed varying levels of support but ultimately refrained from committing troops, reflecting divisions in European attitudes toward U.S. military actions. Economic tensions between the U.S. and Europe grew during the 1970s, particularly regarding monetary policies. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s triggered major shifts in global exchange rates, leading European nations to seek greater financial autonomy. As a response, European countries created the European Monetary System, EMS, a framework designed to stabilize exchange rates among European currencies and reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar. The push for monetary integration within Europe marked a turning point in transatlantic relations, as European nations began taking more independent economic decisions. The formation of the EMS laid the groundwork for the eventual creation of the euro, further strengthening Europe's financial independence from the U.S. In 1979, due to increasing economic instability caused by currency fluctuations and the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, European leaders sought to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar and create a more stable monetary system within Europe. This led to the formation of the European Monetary System, EMS, in March 1979, spearheaded by Roy Jenkins, then president of the European Commission. The EMS was designed to bring stability to European economies by linking their currencies, preventing large fluctuations in exchange rates. One of its key features was the European Currency Unit, ECU, a system that combined the value of multiple European currencies. Another essential element was the exchange rate mechanism, ERM, which set limits on how much each country's currency could fluctuate. If a currency moved too far outside these limits, governments were required to intervene and adjust the exchange rate. This system helped foster closer cooperation in monetary policies among European Economic Community (EEC) member states, laying the groundwork for the future creation of the euro. During the 1980s, under U.S. President Ronald Reagan, the United States and Europe worked together to promote free markets and economic liberalization. This aligned with Europe's push for a single European market, which was formalized through the Single European Act of 1986. Despite this alignment, trade disputes emerged, particularly regarding agricultural subsidies. The EU's Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, which provided government support for European farmers, led to disagreements with the U.S. as American producers sought better access to European markets. The end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 significantly reshaped the relationship between the United States and Europe. With the Soviet threat gone, the focus shifted from military alliances to economic partnerships and global stability efforts. This shift was formalized through key agreements that expanded cooperation between the two sides. One of the most notable was the Transatlantic Declaration of 1990, which established a structured dialogue between the European Community and the United States. The agreement emphasized shared democratic values, human rights, and the rule of law, setting the foundation for regular discussions on economic and political matters. Building on this, in 1995, the new Transatlantic Agenda, NTA, was introduced during an EU-US summit in Madrid. This agreement sought to strengthen economic and political cooperation, with a focus on promoting peace, democracy, and development worldwide, addressing global challenges such as environmental issues and terrorism, expanding world trade, and fostering closer economic relations. It also aimed to build stronger connections between people by encouraging educational and cultural exchanges. The NTA marked a significant shift in transatlantic relations, evolving from simple consultations into coordinated and joint actions. Despite these efforts at unity, economic tensions between the United States and its global partners have escalated in recent years, particularly due to President Donald Trump's tariffs, which have created trade disputes with Canada, Mexico, China, and the European Union. These restrictions could have serious consequences, especially if the affected countries coordinate their efforts to counter U.S. policies. Given that the United States relies heavily on imports, retaliatory tariffs from its trading partners could disrupt the American economy by increasing inflation and making goods more expensive for consumers. Industries such as technology, automotive, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, which depend on global supply chains, could face higher production costs, reduced competitiveness, and supply shortages. Countries such as China, Canada, and the EU hold considerable economic influence, and if they redirect trade to other markets, it could weaken U.S. businesses and limit American dominance in international trade. The EU in particular may push harder for economic independence, reducing its reliance on U.S. goods, technology, and defense capabilities. Similarly, Canada and Mexico, as the U.S.'s closest trade partners under the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, could strengthen their cooperation to challenge U.S. policies, leveraging their essential roles in North American supply chains. Meanwhile, China, a major global exporter, could counterbalance U.S. tariffs by expanding trade agreements with other nations, particularly through deals like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which could help China maintain its trade dominance while isolating the U.S. Although the U.S. has a strong domestic economy, its dependence on foreign imports for essential goods, including semiconductors, raw materials, and consumer products, makes it vulnerable to economic countermeasures. If these trade tensions continue, U.S. businesses will likely struggle with increased costs, disrupted supply chains, and potential job losses, leading to slower economic growth. Beyond economic retaliation, these disputes could also reshape global alliances. Countries affected by U.S. tariffs may deepen their trade partnerships and develop economic agreements that bypass the U.S., further reducing American influence. Europe's growing trade ties with Canada, Mexico, and Asia-Pacific nations could accelerate global economic integration, making the U.S. less central to world trade. Additionally, foreign investors may shift their focus to other markets, gradually weakening America's position as a dominant economic force. If the United States continues its protectionist approach, it risks isolating itself while strengthening cooperation among its trading partners. Over time, this could result in a diminished role for the U.S. in global trade, a fragmented international market, and greater economic challenges within the country. As these global shifts unfold, the world's economic landscape is changing, and the way the U.S. chooses to respond will determine its future position on the international stage. If you found this analysis insightful, consider liking this video and subscribing to stay updated on the latest global economic and political developments. Your support helps us continue bringing you valuable content. Thank you for watching.